joined by Professor Walter Block. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm really looking forward to this. I know that in our email exchange before this, you said that it was important to the give each other time to talk without interruption and try to have approximately equal time. So I think in the interest of that, when we get into this, we can treat it like we're playing chess in the park, with a with a little clock in between. I will set a little timer both when I speak and when you speak. So if you want to, if you've only got 30 seconds of stuff to say, that's cool, right? Like, which might sometimes be the case, answer a question or something. But if but otherwise, I'll just do that to make sure that that I don't like cut you off if you haven't been speaking for let's say 4 minutes at a time. So. But before we get to all that, right, before we actually start arguing with each other, when I mentioned that I was having you on, somebody on social media showed me a video that with a piece of biographical information about you, which which I thought was surprising and kind of funny, which is that there's a video where you talked about your own political journey from, I think, originally considering yourself to be some sort of socialist to your current libertarian views, and at the beginning of that journey, actually high school friends with one Sanders.
That's true. But before I get on that, if you don't mind, I'd like to just make a comment on Judith Jarvis Thompson.
Yes.
I share everything you said, and maybe W or whatever. She is a magnificent writer, very incisive, very keen. The only thing I disagree with you about is you said she was very old when she died. She's younger than if she was born in 49, I was born in 41. What, sorry?
1929.
Oh, 29. I heard 49, and I was
no.
Wow, 29. So she was very elderly. I was born in 41. But apart from that, she reminds me a little bit of Ronald Coase. Ronald Coase won a Nobel Prize. He didn't write that much. Judith Jarvis Thompson didn't write that much. But the article that he wrote on social costs, that is Coase, was the most highly cited article in any article in economics. And in economics, and I'm sure in philosophy in your field, it's good to be in prestigious journals and have a good book, but citation indices are very important. And Judith Jarvis Thompson, I mean, as you said, if you take any philosophy course that has anything to do with ethics, you gotta come across her somewhere. So I applaud your analysis or comments about her. I agree with you 100%. I disagree with her. I'm not either pro-life or pro-choice. I'm an evictionist, which is a different view than either pro-life or pro-choice. And I have criticized her on that, but I still support your assessment of her. Just exquisitely brilliant.
Yeah. So it's not what we're going to talk about, but just out of curiosity, do you want to take just a minute to explain what that middle position is?
Okay, well, in libertarians are very divided on the issue of abortion. Ron Paul is totally pro-life. Murray Rothbard is pro-choice. And you can't get two more famous libertarians than Ron Paul and Murray Rothbard. And I think they're both wrong. The joke is if you get 10 libertarians, you ask a question, you'll get 25 answers. So we diverge on that. My view, I call it evictionism, is I start with the view that the fertilized egg is a human being, a very young human being, but a human being. But he is a trespasser. And take the case of rape. A woman is walking down the street, she gets grabbed, she gets impregnated, and now there's this person growing inside of her. That person is a trespasser, and she has the right to evict, but not to kill. So you don't kill innocent trespassers, you just evict them. Now, in the first 6 months or the first 2 trimesters, it doesn't matter. If you evict with modern technology, the person will die. But in the 3rd trimester, the baby is viable outside of the womb, and therefore you're only allowed to evict but not kill. whereas the pro-choice people say you have a right to evict and kill, whereas the pro-life people say you have no right to evict or kill. So I'm a moderate. That's why they call me Walter Moderate Block. I take a moderate position between the pro-choice and the pro-life position.
Fair enough. Yeah, I mean, I think that I actually did a debate with a pro-life activist, Kay Fellows, a few weeks ago, where this issue came up, and I think that what to say about that viability issue is a little bit complicated, because I think what viability means isn't always clear cut. If you have to take like medically heroic measures to keep a fetus alive, I think that's a little bit different from saying that you could you could have separation, you know, without killing, and then they would just be fine. But I guess I did want to, you know, since the last time I had a libertarian on here, we were talking about very like you know, nitty gritty policy stuff, which is always good. But because I know you have very strong views about this, I thought it might be fun to sort of pull back and talk about the much bigger picture, right? You know, sort of more fundamental assumptions. So I was wondering if maybe we could start by you sort of outlining your views about well, I was about to say the legitimate role of government, but you're an anarcho-capitalist. You don't think that there is a legitimate role for government. But so your views about non-aggression and why and property rights, and why from those sort of basic starting points you end up at libertarianism.
Right, but before I do that, again, I just wanted to mention a word about Bernie Sanders since you brought him up.
Oh yeah, please. Yes, sorry, I forgot, but yes, that's okay. Please do. Yes.
All geniuses are absent-minded. You're absent-minded, therefore you're a genius. I'm just kidding. But,
not sure that follows, but I like it. All right, go on. Go for it.
Bernie Sanders and I were buddies, and I have to tell you my Bernie Sanders joke. My Bernie Sanders joke is that Bernie Sanders runs away from nothing. He didn't run away from socialism when it was not that popular. He even has the view that not only should ex-cons vote, but even people in prison should vote. And he doesn't run away from that, even though that's not exactly popular. But there's one person from whom he ran away, and that's me. How so? Because he was one of the best runners in the city, and we ran in the same divisions, half mile and up, half mile, 2.5 miles. And we'd start at the starting line, and then he would run away from me because he was a really good runner. So we were sort of buddies, and we've stayed together in contact every 5 or 10 years. How are you doing? We agreed we have different views, but we both lived in the same quadrant away from Madison High School. So sometimes we walked to school together or back from school from home, and we were on the track team. So we'd go to Van Cortlandt Park in the Bronx, and we'd be together. So we were sort of buddies. He was very political in high school. I was interested in girls and sports and not politics. But, you know, I'm Jewish, I'm in Brooklyn, you know, everyone's a socialist there. So I was a socialist. I didn't think about it. But then later on, I diverged from him. But he's sort of a boyhood chum of mine. And I intend, once this COVID is over, to invite him to speak at Loyola University, because I had Ron Paul speak, and I like to have my students have many different sides. I believe in inclusion and diversity, not so much of skin color or sex or anything, but of ideas. And Bernie certainly has a different idea than Ron Paul, although not so much in foreign policy, because he and Rand Paul, Ron's son, once cooperated on some sort of bring all the troops home kind of thing. So there is an overlap. You know, there's a Venn diagram. And there's an overlap between libertarians and lefties or progressives or socialists or whatever you want to call it. And, you know, if Ron Paul were president, the first thing he'd do is bring home all the troops. Second thing he'd do is give a pardon to everybody in jail who was in jail for victimless crime. Okay, so now that I've done my thing on Bernie Sanders,
so I should mention, actually, before we get to this, that in you know, when your friend Bernie ran for president in 2016, not only, of course, did you not support him, but I was surprised to see on YouTube that you had a libertarian case for Donald Trump. I don't know if you felt the same way this year, or if you'd changed your mind by now.
Well, what I did with 2 other people, I started a thing called Libertarians for Trump. because I thought Hillary was, just horrible. I mean, she's a interventionist, and she's a socialist and fascist, whatever you want to call her. I didn't like her one bit, and I thought Donald was way better. On the other hand, I wanted Gary Johnson, who was running for president on the Libertarian Party ticket, to have as many votes as he could. So what I came up with, or what me and my colleagues came up with, was if you're in a red state or in a blue state, vote for Gary Johnson, because Donald either doesn't need your vote because he's going to get swamped in Massachusetts, or he doesn't need your vote because he's going to win big in Alabama. But if you're in a purple state, then Pennsylvania or Florida or whatever the purple state are, then vote for Donald, because now he needs your vote. So this was my way of trying to have our cake and eat it as well, namely support Donald vis-a-vis Hillary, but also not eschew the Libertarian Party, because we're Libertarians, we want to support Libertarian Party. Okay, so now I'm finally ready to answer your question.
Okay. Sorry. Just to be clear, I do want you to do that, but I didn't quite get to. I mean, just to satisfy my idle curiosity here, did you take the same position in 2020, or had the intermediate 4 years changed your mind?
No, I was just too lazy. I didn't start it up again because I figured that Gary Johnson would get 5% of the vote. I mean, he was the governor of New Mexico, whereas Joe Jorgensen, I figured she'd get 0.25% of the vote and it really wouldn't matter. But in the event, I was wrong. And I wrote this column in the Wall Street Journal where I said, I'm hitting my head against the wall because I should have done it again. And that way, because I regard Biden as horrible. I regard him as a weather vane and sort of a Bernie Sanders type or an AOC type. And Kamala Harris, I mean, if Biden falls apart, Kamala Harris, and she's even more radical than Bernie Sanders. So I was desperately in support of Donald, but I should have made the same push, because the Libertarians did get more than the difference between the two major parties in several of the states. And look what happened in Georgia. If the Libertarians didn't have a candidate in Georgia for the Senate, Perdue would have been in the Senate right now. But he didn't make 50%, and the Libertarian candidate got like 2% or something like that. So now they're going to have a runoff, and God forbid, from my point of view, the Democrats win both. And now Kamala Harris is the deciding vote of the Senate. So I greatly regret I didn't do it again.
Okay, yeah, fair enough. I mean, I think, like I said, I wish that I agreed with you that that Biden was a crypto Bernie Sanders type. I'd be so much happier right now. I think, but in any case, I mean, I do get like like whatever. My preferences would be very different, but the electoral strategy makes sense to me. So, but I don't want to delay you any further. Let's do this.
Okay. Well, the Libertarianism, as I understand it, and as I say, you get 10 libertarians, you get 25 different views. There are two basic, well, maybe three basic foundations of libertarianism. What are they? First, the non-aggression principle. Keep your mitts to yourself. Don't be grabbing other people with their property unless you have their permission. Sadomasochism is okay because consenting adults agree. Boxing is okay because, if I punch you in the nose, but you've agreed to be in the boxing match with me, it's okay. Now, I can't bite your ear and I can't hit below the belt, but we've agreed to punch. So that's okay. So the non-aggression principle means no murder, no theft, no slavery, no, I don't know what, rape, whatever. It just rules that out. But now you need another part of the Libertarian foundation, and that is private property rights. Because I notice you have a nice shirt there. What is it, Montana? No.
Michigan State.
Michigan State. Now, suppose I grab that Michigan State shirt right off of you. Am I a criminal or not? Did I violate the non-aggression principle? Well, it all depends upon who's the rightful owner of that Michigan State shirt. If you stole it from me yesterday, which you didn't, and I grab it, well, then I'm the good guy. And if you resist me, you're the bad guy. But the fact of the matter is I never saw that shirt before. It's your shirt. And if I grab it, I'm the thief. But it's because of private property rights. Well, how do you get private property rights? We go to John Locke. You mix your labor with virgin land. You start growing corn. I domesticate a cow and I get milk. And now in Robert Nozick's terminology, another famous philosopher, any legitimate title transfer. So barter would be one. So you have corn, I have milk, we trade. Now I have the corn, even though I didn't produce it. You have the milk, even though you didn't produce that. But we can trace it to homesteading and legitimate title transfer. Any legitimate title transfer, such as buying, selling, lending, gambling, whatever. And the third plank of libertarianism is free association. Nobody should be forced to associate with anyone else against his will. I mean, the big problem with slavery and rape is that the victim is forced to associate with either the master or the rapist when they don't want to. So those would be the three planks of libertarianism. And then what are the implications? Well, no victimless crimes, economic freedom, laissez-faire capitalism, non-aggression. The U.S. is not the policeman of the world. And that would be libertarianism in 3 minutes.
All right, nice. You came in under time. So I like that you started out by acknowledging something that is very important that I think that some presentations of libertarianism maybe skip over, which is that non-aggression by itself doesn't actually get you very far, because if we have the difference between aggression and defense is who's entitled to a piece of property. So if as you say, you take the shirt off of me, well, if you're the rightful owner of the shirt, it's not aggression. If you aren't, it is. Which is very important, because I think that there's a way that I'm often frustrated by that people present libertarianism, that it's about, well, here are all the things that nobody should have to go to jail for. You know, I don't want to use force to do this or that or the other thing, but of course, a no trespassing sign is an implicit threat of force. You know, that if you trespass, I'm going to, well, certainly ask you to leave, but if you don't, then I have options that may include, calling the cops in your preferred society. That might play out differently, because there wouldn't be any, cops, but there might be.
No. There'd be cops, private cops.
Okay, so I call it, so I'm threatening to call the private cops. Fair enough, right? So this is really important, because when we talk about something like redistributive taxation, that you're going to be taxed to pay for somebody else, that you're going to be taxed to pay for somebody else's healthcare, for example. If you start from the premise that other person, that other person has a right to healthcare, that's like a legitimate, that they are entitled to that, that money, that they have that it's morally right that they should have it to pay for their healthcare, rather than that you should have it in the bank account, then the non-aggression principle hasn't been violated. So what's really doing all of the work isn't the non-aggression principle, it's the underlying theory of property rights. Because I could agree with John Rawls that the right theory of entitlement is one that's based on considerations that have nothing to do with whether my property can be traced back to a just act of original acquisition, like you're talking about. I could think that the right theory of entitlement has to do with considerations like fairness, but still agree with the non-aggression principle that, sure, if you're entitled to something, then I shouldn't take it away. It's kind of tautological. So I think that the two things that I really like to pursue are, one, that question about what is the right theory of entitlement. Why should we accept this theory of property rights? That it has to that you're only entitled to something, and you are entitled to something if it can be traced back to a just act of original acquisition. We'll get to that, right? But the one that I'd really like to pursue before that is the gap between this theory and the world that we live in. Because I understand that if we lived in a world where maybe, you know, we started out with Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, and I just hit time, so I'll just wrap up the sentence and then throw it to you. If we start with Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, and their descendants spread out over the world, engaging in homesteading of unclaimed land, and then they barter with each other, or, you know, they invent money, and then eventually we get the distribution of wealth and property that we have in the world today. I understand why, if your theory is right, that would mean that everybody was entitled to what they had, and taxation would be theft and all that stuff. But of course, that's not the world that we live in at all, right? The economic history of the real world has almost no resemblance to that. So I guess that's what I'd be interested in hearing you speak to, how this grounds the rights to property that people actually have in the world as it exists right now.
Very well said. And by the way, about this timing, you don't have to really do the chess clock. I mean, if it's 60-40 or 40-60, that's okay. I just don't want it to be 90.
Well, I just want to make sure, because there's a concern that you raised. So,
but you know, we're amiable. We're having a nice discussion, and you know, we don't have to, you know, make it to the second. Okay. I think what you're saying is very valuable and very correct. With one maybe minor disagreement, when you say that it has no resemblance to that. It has a little bit of a resemblance, or how much of a resemblance we can argue about, but it's not no resemblance. It's got some resemblance. Well, now I think what we're getting into is reparations. Now let's take reparations for slavery. There's this guy Horowitz. David Horowitz.
Yeah.
David Horowitz, the Second Thoughts guy, who says, look, we shouldn't have any reparations to blacks for slavery because, look, none of us now ever had a slave, right? You didn't have any slaves. I didn't have any slaves. Nobody living now, at least in the United States, I don't know about what's going on in Africa, we never had slaves, nor any black people been slaves. So the whole thing is crazy, and we shouldn't have any reparations. That's one extreme view. The other extreme view is all whites owe all blacks reparations, slavery, because, you know, we had slavery. And I'm, again, Walter Moderate Block, and I say, let's take a moderate position here. It's true that not all whites owe all blacks anything, because many blacks just came to this country 2 years ago. I'm Jewish. My parents came, my father's people came from Russia in 1880. My mother's parents came from Poland in 1902. We had nothing to do with slavery, so why do I owe anybody anything? But Horowitz starts with a proper premise that not all whites owe all blacks anything, and he concludes erroneously that no whites owe any blacks anything, and that's false. Now, what should have happened in 1865 is we should have had an ex post facto law saying slavery is a violation of rights. Slight violation of rights. I'm kidding, not a slight, a very, very serious violation of rights. And what should have happened is that we would have put in jail or punished all the slave owners. And we would have taken all of their property. And I mean, let's say there were 500 slaves and there were, I don't know, 20,000 acres, if I got the right numbers. Each slave gets 40 acres and a mule. That's where you got 40 acres and a mule from. Namely, you divide the plantation into 500 bits, 40 acres each, and you give a mule or whatever it is, a barn, I don't know. And we don't have to worry, you know, I only get 10 acres, I'm a slave because it's a fertile acres, and you get 70 acres because it's not fertile. We don't have to worry about that. Just on average, everyone gets it. But what happened instead is that the slave owner kept his property, and he said to the slaves, well, there's no more slavery, goodbye, I might hire you, but I'm not giving you a penny. And right now, there's some great-great-grandson of the slave owner who lives in Mississippi. He's got that plantation, and he's innocent in the sense that he is, he didn't have slaves, but he's the holder of stolen property. Look, if that shirt, the Michigan state shirt, if your grandfather stole it from my grandfather, I want that shirt back. Because you're innocent, you didn't steal anything, but you are now the holder of stolen goods. So you should give it back to me. So my view is we should have reparations, and we should have no ex post facto laws. That, I mean, the Nuremberg trials established that. The Germans said we were just following orders, and we said tut tut tut, no no no. Putting people in concentration camps and killing them is not a real good thing, and we're going to punish you for it, even though it was legal in Germany to do that, and they were just following the law. So my answer to your question, my long-winded answer to your question is, we have to have reparations from some people to other people, but now the burden of proof is on the plaintiff. Possession is 9/10 of the law. And the further back you go in history, you go back to the Indians where there's no written language, you go back 2,000 years ago to Arabs and Jews, it's harder to prove anything. But if some black guy in Harlem can now prove that his great-grandfather was a slave in this Mississippi place, he should get a 1/200th or 1/500th of that plantation. And if there are others, they should take the whole plantation away from him. So I agree that the present distribution of property is not exactly kosher, but we libertarians believe in reparations, and we don't believe in any right to health care. We only believe in negative rights. They're only right not to be murdered, not to be stolen from, not to be raped. No right to health care. That's just wealth. No right to wealth, because if I have a right to health care, you have an obligation to give it to me. Whereas if I have a right not to be murdered, you have an obligation not to murder me. If I have a right not to be raped, which I do, you have an obligation not to rape me. But if I have I'm sorry?
I'll do my best. So I did want to jump in here. So
sure.
So I think that So I like, yeah, I mean, I understand, of course, that you only believe in negative rights. I think there are positive rights, like a right to healthcare. That doesn't mean a right to healthcare doesn't mean a right to have any particular person deliver that healthcare. What it does mean is a right to have the tab picked up by the state via progressive taxation. That's what people believe in a right to healthcare actually mean by it. So I do want to press this point about why we should believe that there are only negative rights, why we should think that the right theory of entitlement is that everybody's entitled to exactly what they end up with as a result of this process, of some process of what Robert Nozick called capitalistic acts between consenting adults, going back to some just act of original acquisition, if we live in a world where it actually happened that way. Because even if we did live in such a world, to put my cards on the table, I would still disagree with you. But I'm also curious, I do want to just spend another minute on the gap between the world that we actually live in and that one, because I get why you think that that the living descendants of slaves should have a right to get reparations from the living descendants of slave owners if the living descendants of slave owners still have wealth that's derived from the misdeeds of their ancestors. I get why you have that position, but the thing that I get a little bit less is how this idea that, okay, if that can't be proven, then everything else just stays as is comes from, because this idea that, possession is 9/10 the law. I mean, that's a very useful pragmatic principle for a legal system, just trying to figure this out. But it's certainly not obvious how it flows from or even fits with the idea that what people are basically entitled to is whatever comes out of this free market process. And so to make that objection concrete, right? Because I can imagine, I'm sure you talk about this all the time. I'm sure you get where I'm going, but for anybody who's watching or listening to this who might not quite get the point, right? Let's tweak that example that you just gave about the plantation, and let's say only half of that is true, right? So let's say that it is true, or only half of it can be proven, right? So the half that can be proven is that there is some descendant of a slave owner who is still enjoying wealth that's derived from his ancestors' holding of slaves. He's still living in the old plantation house. There's been an uninterrupted family fortune over the generations. But let's say the other half doesn't exist. Either either it's impossible to prove that any particular person was a descendant of a slave held on that plantation, or just for whatever reason, there just are no living descendants of the slaves who were held at that plantation. It's if I'm hearing you right, it's also your position that the person who is currently occupying that old plantation manor and is currently enjoying that inherited stolen wealth has a right to continue in it. That it would be that if we that if that money were taxed, for to provide for any of the positive rights that I believe in, that would therefore violate that person's rights. And I don't understand where that comes from on your theory, because if you say that what entitles somebody to a given piece of property is that either they did the lock-in, labor mixing, they homesteaded the piece of land themselves or whatever, or there's some sort of process of barter or sale or gambling that, by which their possession of it can be traced back to that. Neither of those would be the case here. So where does their right to that property come from?
Well, that's a very, very good criticism on your part. I think it's very incisive on your side to query that. Before I answer it, I just wanted to say one or two things about Nozick and Rawls and Wilt Chamberlain. You remember the Wilt Chamberlain example? I thought that Nozick just obliterated Rawls.
But I wouldn't necessarily assume that everybody watching or listening is familiar with it. So do you want to just remind us what it is very quickly?
Yeah, Wilt Chamberlain is a great basketball player, and he says, hey, everyone come watch me dunk a basketball. And we all pay him $20, and now he's got 20,000. And he's very rich, and we're very poor. Well, less rich, and he's very rich. And if we want to have some sort of egalitarianism, what we have to do is obliterate that, and then we have to make him give back the money, in which case he's not going to do it in the first place. So if you take the Rawlsian system seriously, says Robert Nozick, who I regard as one of the eminent libertarian philosophers, way up there with Judith Jarvis Thompson and a few other people, well, then we can't have any trade, because every trade leads to some sort of inequality. But we both gain, because when I pay that $20 to watch him, I'm richer because I valued the sight of him dunking the basketball at more than $20. Otherwise, I'm not kicking in 20. And he valued the 200,000 he gets, or the 20,000 he gets, way more than the sweat of dunking a basketball, and he likes it anyway. So there's mutual gain, but the mutual gain would have to be obliterated, and we couldn't have any trade, and we'd all die if we didn't have any trade. So that's one justification. A similar justification goes for 9/10 of the law. Look, suppose it were reversed. Suppose the burden of proof was not on the, look, I want that shirt. I'm sorry, I've been attracted to your shirt. Nothing, no perversion here. I'm not a weirdo. Well, I am in some ways, but not on that shirt. But I want that shirt. Now, right now, the law is possession is 9/10 of the law, and I go to court and I say I want that shirt, and I have to prove something. I have to show a bill of sale, or God knows what I have to show. But suppose it was the other way around, and you had to prove it, and the burden of proof is on you, and you threw away the bill of sale, or your Aunt Tilly bought you the shirt and she threw it away. I could get that shirt. And now you could come back and get the shirt back from me, and I could go to Bill Gates and say, I want that Maserati. And unless Bill Gates has got ironclad, in other words, if we did this, we would be like my criticism of Coase. Coase, well, I don't want to get into Coase because I'll take 5 whole minutes. But if we did this, we'd all die. Why would we all die? Because property rights wouldn't be safe. Anyone could claim anything else, and with the burden of proof on the defendant, and people don't keep. You don't have a record of the bill of sale for that shirt. You don't have a picture, say, of you wearing that shirt. So I would get that shirt, and then you could come back and get the shirt back from me, and somebody else could get the shirt from the two of us. So possession of 9/10 of the law and the burden of proof is on the plaintiff is crucially important in legal philosophy, because if you turn it around, you see that we'll all be busy grabbing each other's property and we won't be producing anything, or a lot of people won't be. So that would be my reason.
Okay, so I think we want to separate two separate issues, and I also before I throw it back to you, I do want to go back to Wilt Chamberlain because I think that's a even more basic issue. But I want to separate out two things, right? One is the burden of proof, and the other one is the like moral significance of current possession, right? So I think it's certainly fair to say that yes, obviously we want the we want the burden of we have burden of proof to be on people who want to to disrupt the way that things are right now. That that if you claim that I stole something from you, of course, burden of proof should be on you. On that, we completely agree, but I'm not sure how relevant that is to this situation, because if we're talking about a case, and I would argue, I don't know how deep in the weeds we want to go on this. I would argue that that the typical case is maybe a little closer to to the case of the descendant of the slave owner than we'd like to admit, because of course the economic history of the real world is so full of this stuff. I mean, capitalism, even in Europe, emerged from feudalism, and there was certainly no shaking of the Etch-a-Sketch and everybody starting out with equal amounts of property after that. In fact, what you had was brutal enclosure of the land to force people off the land they were living on, to make them get jobs in factories. And that was a walk in the park compared to what happened here in the New World with slavery and dispossession of Native Americans, etc. And I think the issue is going to be much broader than the question of whether you can of whether there's some individual parcel of land that has some other rightful owner, because all economic transactions are going to be, again, this is all assuming for the sake of argument that this is what we should care about, whether you can, like, this is what entitles somebody to a given good, whether or not you can trace it back to some just act of original acquisition, which is certainly not my view. But if it was, then I'd be really worried about trying to figure out how to apply it, because all past economic transactions, take place in an environment where, who has the money to lend to who has the money, to win from who in gambling, et cetera, are thoroughly polluted by the extremely non-pristinely libertarian economic history of the real world. But in the example that I gave you, in particular, the slave owner, we're not dealing with the burden of proof question, right? We know that guy has, remember this example, we know that that this manor was inherited from somebody who was inherited from somebody who was inherited from somebody who was a slave owner. We know that, right? We just don't have a rightful claimant. So the question is, okay, so we can't redistribute it to a rightful claimant, but if we redistribute it to other things that are important, have we therefore violated the guy's moral rights? Is there some property right that he has to that we are that we are duty bound to respect? And if so, where does it come from? And it doesn't see it. We know it doesn't come from being able to be traced back to a just act of original acquisition, because in this hypothetical, we know that that's not the case, right? We know that it can't be traced back. Remember, we don't have a rightful claimant, but we know how he got it. So again, my question on that was, if this descendant of slave owner has a right to that wealth that's ultimately derived from the slavery, the family fortune from slavery, if he has a right to to not be assessed some sort of tax on his manor that he inherited from his slaving family, where does that right come from? And that's what I was trying to push. Now, I do want to, I know we're being informal about the time, but since I have been timing myself just to make sure, I do want to throw it back to you before I get to the Wilt Chamberlain thing. But I am glad that you brought that up. That's important.
Well, I think, again, you're making a very sophisticated argument against my position, and I appreciate that. But you're trying to twist away from what I said. And what I said was that if we adopt this, that we know that this guy in Mississippi, we know where he got that plantation from the blood, sweat, and tears of Black people 150 years ago. We know that, and I concede that. I mean, it's hardly be a concession. I mean, it's obviously true. But if we then say, well, therefore he should give it up, then we're we're undermining the possession is 9/10 of the law, and we're undermining the burden of proof argument. And then we get back into what I was saying, that we're going to be busy in court grabbing each other's property, and we'll all die because we won't be producing anything. I once got into an argument with Milton Friedman on this question, and he said, look, land value is only 10% of the GDP. Forget about all that. The problem with the Black people, the problem with Black poverty is their family has been screwed up by welfare. They're unemployed because of minimum wage. The drug law puts them all in jail, or not all in jail, and, forget about it. And I said, well, you're right. As a matter of practicality, reparations aren't that important. If I were the king of the Black people and I wanted to promote Black welfare, I would say, forget about this. It's only 10% of the GDP. Let's worry about the Black family. Let's worry about the drugs. Let's worry about minimum wage laws. But I said to Milton Friedman, but what about justice? And he said, well, the desire for justice will lead to disarray or something. Namely, he didn't understand what justice was. You and I understand what justice is. You and I are closer on this than he and I, and he's a libertarian and you're not. I had one or two other things I wanted to say.
Okay, well, let's at least circle back now, because I do obviously, just just for the record, we have severe disagreements on the empirical question about the causes of the racial wealth gap, but I think that probably goes without saying. But I do, but I'm going to say it anyway. But I don't want to let the Wilt Chamberlain thing get lost. So this is so if you have a theory, this is not supposed to just be an objection to Rawls, who I sort of gestured at earlier, right? Thinking that justice was about fairness. But it's not just supposed to be an objection to the nitty gritty details of Rawls's theory. It's supposed to be an objection to any theory according to which to decide whether somebody is entitled to a given piece of property, how wealth should be distributed. We should be worrying about the end state. We should be worrying about, whether there's massive inequality. We should be worried about whether there's poverty. We should worry about whether people are dying because their GoFundMe to buy more insulin, wasn't sufficiently funded, which unfortunately happens. That we shouldn't be worried about that, right? What we should be worried about, Nozick thinks, is the origin, right? Where this distribution of wealth comes from. Does it have immaculate origins that we can trace it back to these just acts of original acquisition, like homesteading unclaimed property, or does it come about in some illegitimate way? And so he says, look, if you're Rawls, or if you're somebody who's you have any other theory according to which we should care about the justice of the end state, then let's assume that we start with the end state. Everybody gives a like there's a whatever, everybody gives $20 to Wilt Chamberlain to see him play basketball. Suddenly he's the richest person in the world, and now he says you're supposed to have a problem because on the one hand the end state isn't what you want, right? Surely your theory of justice doesn't tell you that Wilt Chamberlain should be the richest person in the world, but on the other hand, where's the injustice? Because it can't be that it wasn't their money to spend however they want, according to your theory. It was, because we started off at the end state that you think is right. So who has a legitimate complaint? Nobody has a legitimate complaint. And what I would say about that is even sort of bracketing the issue that we've sort of been circling around with all this stuff about reparations and whether possession is good enough to have property rights. I think that so one issue is that I think that the actual origins of economic inequality in the real world, I would argue, bear very little resemblance to the Wilt Chamberlain case. But then the other issue is that I think that, well, somebody could have a legitimate complaint. Like if Wilt Chamberlain makes so much money off of this that we get to a point where he could be 5% of it could be taxed away. And that would save a lot of people's lives through healthcare. That would mean that people got to go to college, who wouldn't get to go to college, etc., then I think the people who don't get to do those things have a legitimate complaint. Now, if they're the ones who gave the $20, then I understand that you could say, well, okay, I mean, they should have thought of that. But if they're the the children or the grandchildren of the people who did so, even that doesn't really apply. And I think that they do have a legitimate complaint. And I'd say that as far as, okay, was there anything unjust or objectionable about the giving of the $20? No, but one, Nozick's kind of loading the deck because he's assuming that the primary question we should be concerned with is how did this come about, which is the issue in dispute. And then two, I'd say that I think that he might be committing what's sometimes called the composition fallacy, which is like if I say, nobody would actually say this, but it gets the idea across. Every molecule that makes up the Brooklyn Bridge is invisible, therefore the Brooklyn Bridge is invisible. Well, just because the individual transactions that bring about some overall distribution of wealth are all individually fine, right? The unobjectionable, doesn't necessarily mean that the resulting distribution of wealth, that's maybe constituted by all of them, is unobjectionable, especially if, my theory of justice, my theory of what should happen is, I mean, whatever, I'll put my cards on the table. I would go further than this, but just to start with, right, that it's not that we should necessarily stop people from engaging in all sorts of economic interactions the other 355 days of the year, but that every April 15th we should take measures to correct that. And to take some of it away, to redistribute to other causes, etc., which isn't going to cause any of the sort of chaos that you're worried about if possession wasn't 9/10 of the law. It's a very orderly process. It's not disruptive, and so I think that the Wilt Chamberlain example doesn't really disturb my sleep in my continued advocacy of redistribution.
Okay, I'm gonna let you have the last substantive word.
Okay.
I disagree with several things, but the hours
and
I gotta go.
Okay,
but
fair enough.
I wanted to pay you a compliment. I know that you've had debates with other libertarians. I have had other debates with other lefties or socialists or whatever, progressives, whatever you call yourself. And I wanted to say that this is the most enjoyable one I've ever had. Because every other one I've had, they start interrupting me, they start laughing at me. The attitude I get from you is we are fellow buddies. We're trying to get to the truth with a capital T. We're trying to get 1/1,000,000th of an inch closer to it. We're not maybe succeeding, but we're trying. Namely, we're being polite to each other. We're being supportive of each other. My criteria for when I win a debate is not whether I convince the audience. I want to convince you. And if I don't convince you to be a libertarian, I've failed. So I now make a proposition to you, and I'm going to utter a threat against you. I want to do this again, and if you don't have me on your show again, I'm going to steal that shirt. So
okay, all right, fair.
So watch out, boy.
all right, understood. Despite your threats of violence, I will have you back on for sure. I'm not as disconsolate because my ambitions aren't as high as yours. I didn't, my ambition is not to convince you to be a socialist. I imagine that if Bernie couldn't do it, I probably can't. But I will. But I would perhaps, anybody who's watching or listening, who agrees with you, if I can give them any of those second thoughts in the opposite direction of Horowitz's second thoughts, then I'm happy. But who knows? In any case, much appreciated, Professor Walter Block, as libertarian economist and commentator. Is there anything you want to plug before you go?
I don't know. Libertarianism is great.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that. And I will speak to you again at some point in the future.
Absolutely. It was a pleasure. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.